Throughout the centuries, royal palaces have been symbols of power and opulence, but behind their majestic facades lie secrets that few dare to reveal. Hidden corridors, secret passages, and concealed chambers form a dark labyrinth that has witnessed events unrecorded in the official annals of history. Ancient documents, accounts from former staff, and whispers passed down through generations suggest that these hidden paths were the stage for political conspiracies and possibly dark rituals. What really happened in those silent shadows? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just a click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to recommend these videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's dive into the video. Few people know, but some of the most protected files of the British monarchy aren't vaults with jewels or old letters. They're architectural blueprints. Documents that reveal the physical backstage of the palaces. And we're not just talking about grand halls and ornate corridors. In forgotten archives and unofficial versions of these maps, markings appear and paths that simply shouldn't be there. Things began to change in 2017. An independent historian, Geoffrey Manson, was combing through 19th century documents when he found something strange in the records of the Royal Institute of British Architects. A blueprint of Buckingham Palace showed an underground corridor that ended in a circular structure, isolated, with no windows, no visible exits. There, a single handwritten note, retention room. The name alone raises questions, but the place itself raises even more. There is no modern record of this chamber, no assigned function. And the most curious part, it's only accessible from behind a bookshelf in the old royal library, a detail confirmed by internal images from a 1953 renovation. These images, taken by workers, showed a partial opening, before the area was officially sealed off for structural reasons. But was that really the only reason? One of the workers involved in the renovation said years later that the space felt older than the rest of the palace. The walls didn't follow the same stone pattern. The environment was cold, with no natural lighting. And on the floor, carved markings in geometric shapes. When questioned, he said he felt like he was entering a place that didn't want to be found. The account was officially dismissed, but never denied. This brings us to the blueprints of architect John Nash, responsible for major works in the palace during the 19th century. Among the designs, there are unusual markings, circular symbols, Latin letters out of context, and even diagrams with proportions similar to esoteric figures. None of this makes sense within a purely functional project. And that's where the theory begins to take shape. What if these structures were designed for a purpose beyond architecture? According to some researchers, the positioning of these hidden spaces follows geometric patterns used in ancient rituals. Not by chance, many of these areas are out of sight from any visitor or regular staff. Are they merely security routes? Or something more, reserved spaces for meetings that were never logged, encounters with people who never appeared in any records? At Windsor Castle, the situation is similar. After the 1992 fire, excavations revealed stone tunnels that didn't lead to functional areas. They ended in an oval, buried chamber with no windows, with columns driven directly into the ground. It was sealed a few days later, but images were leaked. In one of them, a clearly visible symbol is carved into the floor, a 7-pointed circle. The same symbol has been attributed to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an occult society active from the late 19th to early 20th century. Coincidence? Exaggeration? Or the kind of evidence no one wants to openly discuss? The most curious thing is that these discoveries don't appear in any official report. No statement from the Crown. No attempt at public explanation. Just silence. And when one observes the renovations made over the centuries, a pattern emerges. Wings are altered, access points disappear, and certain palace sectors simply cease to exist on the most recent maps. This raises an important question. Are they hiding passages that fell into disuse, or deliberately erasing routes that are still active? A study published by English architect Robert Chilton raises an intriguing hypothesis. According to him, the layout of Buckingham follows a logic that is not practical but symbolic. Staircases that intersect unnecessarily, wings that force repeated direction changes, and empty rooms positioned in restricted access areas. It resembles initiation structures, like symbolic labyrinths used in ancient orders. Could the palace be a kind of ritual labyrinth? In 2004, Chilton wrote that space in these places is not just physical, it's political. He believed that certain routes inside the palace were designed to ensure some people could move without ever being seen. Heard maybe, but never seen. And if that's true, what else could be hidden behind these walls? There are also accounts from staff who worked in restricted areas. One of them, under anonymity, said that certain underground compartments were marked with Greek letters and could only be accessed in pairs. When asked why, he simply replied, "It's tradition." But what kind of tradition requires that level of secrecy? And finally, what about all the nameless compartments, corridors with no destination, staircases that end at smooth walls? An architectural accident, or part of a much larger design that was never meant to be understood by everyone? Not all mysteries of the royal palaces are buried beneath stones or hidden in ancient scrolls. Some have come to light through mouths that, over time, ceased to fear. Guards, butlers, gardeners. People who, for years, roamed the corridors of Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle and slowly began to share what they saw or heard, without ever finding explanations. In anonymous interviews given to British newspapers like the Daily Express and The Guardian, accounts emerged that, at first glance, might seem like mere backstage gossip. But when these stories are repeated with minimal variations between different sources and describe the same corridors, the same hidden doors, and the same strange sounds, something begins to take shape. Something the maps don't show. One of the most cited stories involves a former security guard who did night rounds at Buckingham Palace. He claims that, in a deactivated wing of the palace, there was a door with no visible doorknob. During a certain period, every Friday night, 2 uniformed men would approach that door. They stayed there for exactly 47 minutes, left in silence, and disappeared. They never entered through the main entrance, never spoke with other staff. They simply appeared and vanished. The same guard recounts that, when he tried to approach the door during one of these encounters, his badge stopped working. The motion light indicating activity in the corridor turned off on its own, and his communication radio began to emit static noise, as if being interfered with. None of this appeared in reports, and no superior could explain it. But he received a clear order: don't return to that wing. It's not your responsibility. In another account, a maid who worked in the 1980s described a narrow staircase hidden behind a built-in wardrobe in one of the princess's bedrooms. The staircase, according to her, led down to a room that seemed unused for decades. But the strange part was what was inside: a stone altar with candle marks, rusty chains attached to the sides, and an iron cross embedded in the wall. After reporting what she saw, she was fired the next day, under the allegation of protocol violation. Cleaning staff also mentioned sectors where time seems frozen. A hall, known internally as Room 17, never appears on official maps. It can only be accessed with a key that changes hands every 3 months between 3 different people. No one knows why. The hall is always empty, except for a tall mirror leaning against the wall opposite the entrance. Several employees say the mirror's reflection seems off, as if it doesn't quite match the room's movements. These accounts were never officially made public, but some made their way to forums and blogs dedicated to historical mysteries. The most impressive thing is that the descriptions, even from different people from different decades, match in the details. Always the same points of the palace, always the same forced silences, always the same absence of explanations. A former chef from Windsor Castle described a night when he was asked by a superior to prepare a tray for 3 people at 3 a.m. Nothing unusual, except that the meal included unleavened bread, dark wine, and a specific type of British root known for its use in ancient pagan ceremonies. When he questioned the menu, he was told only, "Don't ask, just deliver." The tray was taken by a butler he never saw again. But perhaps the most unsettling account comes from an event assistant who, during a rehearsal for an official banquet, noticed unusual movement beneath the main hall's table. Discreetly looking, she saw a small iron door under the carpet, hidden by movable floorboards. When she returned to the spot days later, the door had been sealed with fresh cement, with no record of construction. All these accounts were dismissed by the Royal Press Office as exaggerations or misunderstandings. But the pattern is clear: sectors where badges don't work, doors that appear and vanish, environments that cause strange physical reactions, chills, radio signal loss, static. Can all this be coincidence? The palace administration's behavior toward these stories also raises eyebrows. Staff who speak too much are removed. Entire departments are rotated without explanation. Whole sectors renovated and sealed, even without structural need. Could this be a containment strategy? Or an effort to cover up something larger? It's as if certain secrets must not even be mentioned, even among those who have served the crown for years. And at this point, one inevitable question hovers over it all. What could be so ancient, so hidden, and so fundamental, that it must be kept secret even from those who live inside the palace itself? If you thought the underground tunnels of royal palaces were merely emergency routes, it's because you haven't seen the right maps yet. For a long time, it was believed that these passages were built to protect royalty in case of attacks. But some old records reveal something else. Connections that go far beyond the palace grounds. Tunnels that cross entire cities. That end in churches, cemeteries, forests. In 1885, a confidential document from the British Home Office mentioned the existence of discrete transport routes between crown properties. A technical detail, seemingly bureaucratic, but when this excerpt was cross-referenced with construction records from the time, something didn't add up. The indicated route began in the underground of Buckingham and ended, silently, beneath the crypt of the Royal Chapel of St. James. The distance between the 2 points is considerable. We're talking about nearly 2 kilometers. This isn't a common passage. It's a feat of underground engineering, silent, invisible, and made for those who cannot be seen walking the streets. Not just anyone deserves such a route, and that's not the only known tunnel. Historical reports from Windsor Castle reveal a passage that crosses the foundations and extends to a nearby forest, where, according to old residents, there once stood a stone structure demolished in the 1940s. Some say it was a chapel, others an ancient altar. The site was closed off and never excavated. One of the most intriguing cases involves a tunnel discovered in 1960 during construction near the Palace of Holyrood House in Scotland. Workers found a narrow, darkened stone corridor that led directly from a hidden room in the palace to a medieval cemetery nearly 800 meters away. The passage was blocked before it could be fully documented, but there are rushed visual records made by archaeologists. In them, one can see a series of carved markings on the walls, symbols resembling 16th century alchemical inscriptions. What could possibly justify a secret route between a palace and a cemetery? Transport of bodies? Occult ceremonies? Or just architectural coincidence from a more superstitious era? Either way, the existence of these tunnels has never been officially acknowledged. Behind the scenes, high-ranking staff comment that certain areas of the palaces aren't accessible even to members of the royal family during occasional visits. These are restricted zones monitored with no open access and connected to corridors that appear on no modern blueprint. When asked about these areas, palace security officials simply reply, "Protocol matters." But what kind of protocols require absolute silence? Is it merely a logistical issue, or do these routes support something still very much in operation? Some argue that the tunnels were used for secret political meetings. Influential figures, internal dissidents, spies. People who could never appear in public alongside royalty, but who needed to be heard or obeyed. And where would such meetings take place, if not in places where no one else could listen? The theory that the tunnels were the stage for silent pacts gains strength when we cross-reference these routes with dates of major historical events. Assassinations of opponents, sudden disappearances, unexpected abdications. In all these moments, the tunnels were there, hidden, connecting the pieces of the chessboard without raising dust. A retired intelligence agent stated, in an interview with foreign press, that these passages are considered living lines of power. They are not just logistical, they are symbolic. They represent total control of space, both public and hidden. He who controls the underground controls the narrative. And that is precisely why the existence of these tunnels is never confirmed, but also never denied. They are like scars of a power that prefers not to be seen. And perhaps for that reason, even today, the ground beneath the palaces remains restless. What else might be buried down there, far from the world's eyes, yet pulsing with the heart of the monarchy? Some stories aren't found in history books. They live in whispers, in rumors passed down through generations, reshaped until no one knows what is truth and what is secret. Among these stories, there is one that quietly haunts the corridors of Buckingham, the tale of the so-called Seventh Room. This room doesn't appear on any official blueprint. No guide mentions it. No staff confirms it. But references are scattered in old archives, private letters, and curiously, in the diaries of architects and butlers who worked for the royal family between the 18th and 19th centuries. All allude to a windowless chamber, accessible through a door with no visible hinges. A space where the presence was heavy and the silence absolute. The name Seventh Room first appears in a manuscript from 1794, signed only with the initials RH, describing renovations in the basement of St. James's Palace. In this document, the author writes, "The seventh is complete, with the seals in order. No one must enter without the blood keys." This phrase, seemingly metaphorical, has puzzled scholars for decades. What are seals? And more intriguingly, what are blood keys? During World War II, when parts of the palaces were adapted to withstand bombings, engineers found a hidden chamber between two foundations of Kensington Palace. The chamber had lead-lined walls, blocked natural lighting, and floor markings indicating frequent movement, despite no visible doors in the vicinity. Upon excavating one of the walls, they discovered an opening sealed with reinforced concrete, sealed from the inside. There was no official record of what was found there, only an internal memo stating that the area was deemed unsuitable for conversion and will be permanently sealed. However, one of the engineers reportedly wrote years later in a personal letter that the space resembled a ceremonial crypt, with a central altar and Latin inscriptions that directly referenced one phrase, sanguinem pro stabilitate, blood for stability. Those words raised alarms among occult historians. They point to ancient rituals of power protection, practiced across various cultures, from Babylon to the Roman Empire. The concept is the same. To keep a structure unshakable, something must be offered in return. In this case, life. The theory is delicate, but not new. What if the endurance of the British crown is not solely the result of tradition, politics, and influence, but of pacts made and maintained in secret, rooted in ancestral rites? Pacts that might require symbolic, or literal, sacrifices during times of crisis? During Queen Victoria's reign, there was an inexplicable rise in disappearances among low-ranking servants and workers. Official records cite position changes or voluntary departures, but no documentation confirms new hires or formal exits. Strangely, many of these names also appear on lists of those authorized to access the palace's underground wings. Coincidence or clue? The so-called Seventh Room may have been, according to a theory by scholars of royal occultism, the space reserved for such acts. A place where power met absolute silence. A room not meant to be remembered, but to ensure that everything else would be preserved. A sacrifice for the throne, literal or not. Curiously, the numerology of the number 7 is also symbolic in various occult orders. It represents the complete cycle, divine order, the balance between matter and spirit. Using a seventh chamber as the seat of a permanent rite is an idea that has appeared in manuscripts linked to the Rosicrucian order and even in rituals of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Could the crown have adopted this symbolism? To this day, there are rumors among staff that certain areas of the palace should not be crossed at night. Discreet reports speak of metallic noises coming from the walls, like dragging chains. Of chambers where the temperature drops drastically despite no source of ventilation. All of it linked to the oldest and least visited parts of the palaces. And when it comes to renovations, a curious pattern emerges. The areas with the most modern interference are precisely where these stories circulate, as if the renovations aim to seal, to hide, to bury something that, if revealed, could call into question not only the structure of the palaces, but everything they represent. Is the Seventh Room merely an old legend, born from fear and superstition, or a real echo of ancient practices that persist to this day, hidden beneath layers of stone, silence, and history? If there's one thing the history of monarchies has taught us, it's that power rarely changes hands peacefully. And behind the scenes of the British crown, silence has always been as sharp as a blade. Over the centuries, several names have vanished from the official records of royalty without fanfare. Some of them, curiously, were linked to the oldest wings of the palaces. Others simply disappeared. Documents from the 18th century discreetly mention the disappearance of 3 of Queen Anne's advisors within just 4 months. Officially, no crime was recorded. No investigation was conducted. All records refer to the cases as voluntary resignations. But private letters between nobles of the time suggest a different picture. In one of them, written by a duke, it reads, "The silence of its corridors was the cruelest sentence." That phrase took on new meaning in 1986, when a restoration at Windsor Castle revealed a long-sealed restricted access corridor. The location, dark and narrow, led to a completely empty room, with no signs of furniture, but with one disturbing detail: dark stains on the stone floor, still visible beneath layers of dust. No official document explained the room's existence. Only a note in the restoration report: space clean, no interference. Among historians, the theory is clear. The labyrinth of hidden corridors was not just a network for escape. It was a mechanism of control, of execution, of silencing. Unsurprisingly, these passages rarely appear on more than one architectural plan. They appear, are used, and then vanish, as if they were designed for a specific purpose, in a specific moment, with well-defined targets. During the reign of George IV in 1829, records show that a close advisor was found dead in his residence, just a few meters from Buckingham. The case was quickly hushed, but reports from the time claimed the man had dined at the palace the night before and had been seen entering through the north wing, one of the few with direct access to the underground tunnels. He was never seen leaving. More than a century later, in 1957, a French diplomat disappeared after a meeting with members of the crown. He had been invited to a discreet gathering at St. James, but never exited the palace. The embassy cited health issues, and the case was closed. But a British journalist claimed to have seen unusual movement that same night in the area. Guards were placed in a hurry, wings emptied, and a group of men entering through a side door, which officially doesn't exist. This pattern repeats over the years. Unexplained deaths, sudden dismissals, names that disappear from the records, and always, somehow, related to the least accessible zones of the palaces. Are these tragic coincidences, or the direct consequence of a system designed to quietly erase any threat? Scholars suggest that the physical labyrinth mirrors a political one, and that navigating it requires more than maps. It requires alliances, knowing who can open a door, and who can close it forever. In the innermost circles of royalty, there is a little-known expression: to get lost in the house. It's used, in a veiled tone, to indicate someone who crossed lines they shouldn't have, whether in the royal corridors or the corridors of power. Someone who saw what they shouldn't, or spoke what was forbidden. These stories don't appear in newspapers. They're not in official biographies, but they circulate among old butlers, gardeners' grandchildren, trusted restorers. All of them carry fragments, and when those fragments are placed side by side, a pattern begins to form. A kind of invisible tribunal, with no judge, no jury, but with an irrevocable sentence. The palace labyrinth isn't just stone, wood, and masonry. It is made of decisions that cannot be undone. And perhaps that's why, to this day, certain doors remain locked, not by padlocks, but by fear. How many have disappeared without a trace, because they entered a room from which no one returns? For a long time, stories about tunnels, hidden passages, and concealed chambers were treated as fragments of a distant past. But what if I told you that these structures not only exist, but are still in use? In recent years, more current reports have begun to circulate. In 2012, during an electrical equipment replacement at Buckingham Palace, a third-party team reported something not in the scope of work: noises. Dry, rhythmic knocks coming from behind a wall considered solid. When they tried to record it with a phone, the device froze. When they returned the next day, the corridor had been sealed off, and the company was dismissed. Other accounts come from the guards themselves who do night patrols. Many refer to wings that are too silent, where radios lose signal for no apparent reason. In an unauthorized interview, one security officer said, "There are places in here even we don't enter, and we work here." In 2019, a thermal inspection camera installed for security testing captured a silhouette moving slowly in the underground, in an area that had been closed off for decades. The file was classified as a reading error, but the camera operator insisted someone was there, and it wasn't a reflection. The footage was removed from the system hours later, and the entire security department was restructured that same week. Here's another curious detail. Internal maintenance reports mention cold zones in the basements. The term is technical, used for areas with reduced airflow or electricity. But staff use it with another meaning, zones where, according to them, the environment changes. The temperature drops suddenly, sounds become muffled, and time seems to slow down. Could it be psychological? Perhaps. But what if it isn't? These reports almost always coincide with the same locations already mentioned in old documents. The same routes, the same corridors. It's as if the labyrinth was never deactivated, only forgotten by those who were never meant to know of its existence. Some newer theories suggest that these structures still serve as discrete routes for high-level meetings. People who don't appear in visitor logs, who enter from one side and vanish from another. Names tied to international politics, global economics, behind-the-scenes diplomacy. After all, if the whole world is watching the movements of the crown, why not hide the most important decisions right beneath everyone's feet? And then there are the rumors about modern rituals. No longer sacrifices, at least not in the literal sense, but symbolic, discrete ceremonies rooted in secret traditions, a way to maintain the cycle. Some researchers claim that specific dates marked on the royal calendar align with certain lunar phases, and during these times, palace sectors are closed for maintenance, always on the same dates, year after year. The question is inevitable. Are we facing repeated coincidences, or a system that remains in motion, far from the spotlight? To this day, authorities do not officially comment on the existence of these passages, but they don't deny them either. No document has been presented, no firm denial, just silence. And let's be honest, when silence is the only answer, it often says far more than we imagine. So the question isn't whether the labyrinth existed. Is it still alive? And if it is, what exactly is it still hiding? For centuries, royal palaces have been seen as symbols of tradition, power, and stability. But behind the marble columns and centuries-old tapestries, there exists a parallel structure, invisible, carefully designed, and perhaps more influential than any throne room. Tunnels, corridors, chambers, and stories that don't fit into official records. A labyrinth built not only with stone and cement, but with secrets, and perhaps with blood. These passages are more than hidden architecture. They are fragments of a silent mechanism that keeps turning even when no one is watching. Because in the end, true power never walks in the daylight. It hides, it protects itself, and it survives. This story is just one piece, and one day, maybe you'll see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it, because more voices mean more discoveries.